Hi! Welcome to what I fear may be a brand new series on this channel called Read This, Not That. And episode 1, in case you couldn't guess it, is going to be titled Say Don't to Destination I Do's. And we're lumping in bachelorette/hen parties as well as destination weddings into this fun little exploration of why going to a secluded island with no cell phone service, no internet connection, and a phone line that's always mysteriously dead with friends you haven't seen in, say, 6 years, is just generally a bad idea. I know, it's shocking. We can thank Sean Gilbert for inspiring this little video. Yeah, I know. I'm matching. With the novel She Started It, a hugely disappointing 2-star disaster I read over the summer, and then proceeded to find lots and lots of books that did it better. And what exactly was done better, you might ask? Well, let's talk about She Started It. This is about 4 childhood besties, Annabelle, Esther, Tanya, and Chloe. And they all went and had their typical childhood education together, you know, blah, 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 and then went off to college and kind of grew apart, but kind of stayed together because they, you know, have some maybe secrets that kept them bonded for life. And one day, this embodiment of said childhood secret gets in touch with all of them and is like, hey guys, remember me, Poppy? I want to invite you to this super exclusive, amazing island out in the middle of the Caribbean. All expenses paid. I'm gonna send y'all a private jet to fly out on, and we're just gonna chill. And by the way, this is my bachelorette party. I'm getting married, and y'all are gonna be my bridesmaids, even though we haven't spoken in like 6 years. They pause for about 6 seconds before they board this private plane. No suspicion at all whatsoever from our characters, which should have been the first tip off for me that like, oh boy, we have a bunch of geniuses here. And yeah, no, they can be bought with like jumbo shrimp, a jumbo jet, and Prosecco. So they get to the island and everyone's like, oh, gosh, Pops, you look a little different, but okay, cool. She's like, so by the by, there's just like one house on the island and then this other house like a mile away that like houses the phone because there's no internet connectivity. We're just gonna really bond and your phones aren't gonna work. And don't worry, the Coast Guard can totally get here within like 30 minutes to an hour if there's a problem when we use the phone. No one's bothered by this. No one's bothered by this. Y'all get what you deserve in the end, if you ask me. Well, not really, okay? Not really. I totally take that back, but like, okay. No one's questioning, no guess. Poppy has kicked out everyone who's supposed to take care of them. She wants to do all like the cooking and stuff. No one's questioning any of this. That's where the description ends of this book. Why did I think this was going to be one of my favorite reads of the summer? This book just drove me absolutely up a freaking wall. First of all, let me just say there should have been like 1,000 trigger warnings. I can't even share all of them because some of them were the literal twists in the book, which I don't love. But even the ones that you could, they just like popped up out of nowhere and didn't need to be there, like at all. You didn't need to do that. I would like to add, I was promised Lord of the Flies meets And Then There Were None. And what I got after a fairly engaging opening, and admittedly a somewhat enjoyable beginning where they were all like doing the rich people stuff, all I got was the least compelling attempt at this trope I've ever gotten. The way that the story was told, first of all, I did not find enjoyable. It was told in dual timelines, past and present, which usually I lap up. That's one of my favorite things in books, particularly this type of book and historical fiction. In this case, it completely didn't work because the past was told diary style. We were reading Poppy's diary, and it was so badly done I could not handle it. The diary entries were written in a voice that was supposed to sound younger, which essentially meant you were getting taken out of the story. The language was attempted to be pulled down, and yet it was not done well enough. You got language instead that was halfway between the language you were used to reading and between language a teenage girl would actually use. So what you got was this juvenile sounding, overly descriptive nonsense that I don't think sounded anything like a journal entry. It was too overwritten to be done by a teenager in a diary, and yet it really stuck out as being poorly done compared to the prose and the rest of the book. The characters themselves, oh my goodness. There were like 4 points of view. We were cycling through all of the friends. Maybe I could tell one apart from the others. Maybe. They were all just these cardboard cutouts, and honestly, I could barely tell when we switched points of view because they were all the same character. Possibly this book could have been somewhat saved from its disastrous fate if we had 4 different characters to learn about, but they were all identical. I couldn't root for them because they were nothing. And Poppy, if we were supposed to be rooting for her, I couldn't stand her either. So I'm not really sure where I was supposed to be engaged in the book because I wasn't cheering for anyone. I gotta be perfectly honest with you. I think the author wanted me to be rooting for someone. I'm just not sure who. And that was another thing, okay? This author did practical backflips, circumventing talking about what actually happened to Poppy in school, where we all kind of like, we know the gist. Like, these girls were probably mean to her and did something, blah, blah, blah. Like, we get it, but the absolute acrobatics this author did to make sure we didn't know exactly what happened was unbelievable. No one would talk like these people talked in order to avoid not mentioning what had happened in the past. It was wild to read, and it was just frustrating. It wasn't fun, it wasn't interesting, it was just absolutely frustrating. When we got to the halfway point, this book should have ended, okay? Because by then Poppy had revealed her cards. She was like, I hate you guys for what you did to me. Here's how I've gotten my revenge. Mwahaha, I did all this to you guys, you know, this is all a setup. And I was like, where is this book going? And then I remembered in the beginning, we had seen there was like bloodshed and stuff, and this disastrous, like, the book pulled one of those, you see the end at the beginning of the book kind of things. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess there's going to be a big second act. And for the second half of the book to take up what it did, I cannot explain to you how long it felt. The dragging it did. By the time we got to the final twist, I didn't care anymore. I was just like, oh please, oh thank God it's over, thank God it's over. I don't even care anymore. I've reached the end of this book. I was just so glad it was over. And that's not how you should feel at the end of a thriller, okay? You should either be like, oh man, I'm so surprised, or oh yes, they got it, or not just relief that it's done. That's not what I want to feel at the end of a thriller. And once you hit that halfway point, there is this tonal shift where I swear to you, I could feel the author behind my shoulder, just waiting for my reactions, waiting for my gasp, just sitting there and going, huh? Did you get that? Did you see what I did there? Oh my God. Yeah. Did you see that? I bet I got you. I don't want to feel the author's presence in the book when I'm reading it. I don't want to feel the work behind what she's doing, and I don't want to feel her waiting for my reaction. And I swear to you, there were sentences where you could feel that, like, pause for dramatic effect. I swear it was written in invisible ink in there at times. It drove me wild. And by the way, when we finally got to the end and we reached that pivotal twist, which I gave that annoyed eye roll to, I hated it. I saw it coming and I hated the reason behind it. I hated that pivotal moment that set all of this in motion. I hated that choice because it is a sensitive topic and it was handled so poorly. I mean, all of the sensitive topics in here were handled, I thought, extremely ham-fistedly, but this one in particular, especially because it was written about in the past by a young person, even in the present, it was done so badly. Anyone who does not deal with this topic well is going to be miserable reading this book. I just kind of couldn't believe that the author left it in the way that she did. Not to mention that the way that our main character went about getting her revenge is so hypocritical because she basically did to these girls what the girls did to her. And I had a million issues with this book. The plot itself was a problem for me. Did I enjoy the reality TV drama-worthy journey to getting to the point where the action started? Sure. But I'm questioning if that is enough to earn this book 2 stars. Because honestly, the ending unraveled like an old fraying scarf. Why don't I offer you some better options? So I found this one last night. I literally read it on Kindle Unlimited and waited for the hard copy to arrive today. It's called The Bachelorette Party by Carissa Ann Lynch, and I am still not sure how I feel about it today, but I know I enjoyed it more than she started it. It does have some trigger warnings as well. I mean, all murder mysteries do, but this has some of the same ones that are in there, as well as some others, but I think they are handled better. And one is kind of a red herring to some extent. So you can proceed with somewhat less caution with this one. So this book has 2 very strong parts that this book does not. First of all, it is written in a much more interesting way, and it has much more interesting characters. So it is about a bachelorette party that is set in New Orleans, and we get 6 points of view, and yet somehow I was able to keep all of them clear in my head because every single character was so very different, and by the end, all of them were so compelling because their stories were not what you thought. They were developed so clearly, they all had motivations, they all had secrets, they all became so interesting and felt like real characters. They were good and bad. They had secrets that weren't what you thought. They were unique and complex individuals. And I really was pleasantly surprised by the characterization. So that was a big mark in favor of the Bachelorette Party. The book is divided into multiple different parts, which I was not expecting. And the prologue starts with a crime scene walkthrough, and you don't know who passes until way far into the book. You're just on your toes the whole time. So that was super interesting. It was told in this very interesting way. First, you see the crime scene through the detective's eyes. So you get a very like criminal breakdown of it. Then you go back and you see the whole bachelorette party, and you see it take place piece by piece through everyone's point of view. Keep filtering through and learning more secrets and seeing alliances build and break, and you see them talking about the past, and you see different pranks being played that are kind of like upping the ante each time, and you're learning more and more about these characters, and then you start seeing police interviews. Then the crime happens, and then you go back and it's the detective's point of view again, and it's through interviews that more and more secrets come out, and you learn more and more, and then you get to switch back to the characters' lives. And then there is an epilogue that just like blew my mind. That was great. So the characterization was amazing, and the back and forth storytelling was really unique, and using a detective to do it, sure, I've seen it before, but it was done really well. And I loved that they used a female detective. Every voice in this book was female, and yet most of their stories were very influenced by a man. We constantly see the groom influencing so many people in the story. We see the mother-in-law's past husband influencing so many people in the story, and then the only male stranger we see in the book does provide the sense of menace at a certain point. So that was really interesting as well. Is it the best book I'm about to recommend to you? No. But is it an interesting choice that I am still letting marinate in my mind? Yes. And do I think it provides some of the most interesting characters with some of the most interesting, complex backstories that I have to offer you here? Yes, that is what the author did so well. Next up is One of the Girls by Lucy Clark. Now, I don't know if you can get this in the States yet. When I bought this, I had to go through Book Depository, which doesn't exist anymore, so I'm sure you can get it through Blackwell's. The tagline for this one is, "A Greek island, a tide of secrets, one killer holiday." And at first, I didn't rate this that high, but the more I've thought about this book, the more I've realized the subtle things that it did that made it so haunting and have made it stick out in my mind. I think it's definitely at least like a 4-star for me. I really liked this book. This is another one where we get points of view from all 6 characters, and all 6 characters are absolutely individual enough that it is not confusing, is not a problem. I don't know if I'm going to say that their backstories are necessarily quite as interesting as they were for the Bachelorette Party, but they are all very individual. They make sense. They're a little maybe more realistic than they were in the Bachelorette Party, and they're people you would expect to exist in England. Like, they feel real. All of them are likable, and all of them give you reasons to root for them, but all of them also give you reasons to suspect them and to not like them as well. So points for that. First off, I love complex characters. What this book did that set it far apart from, I'm going to say, every single other book I'm going to talk about here, except maybe one, was the setting. If you've never been to Greece, read this book and you're going to feel like you have been to Greece. The descriptions were so incredible. You could feel the heat. You could feel the crackling, dry land beneath your feet. You could hear the marketplace around you and the different languages being spoken. The island descriptions were just where this book shone, particularly the descriptions of food. They were so vivid, they were almost pervasive, but not in a bad way. They actually became kind of a driving theme in the book, and let me explain that. They were used masterfully to pull out character traits. It showed who was maternal in terms of like who was making sure people were eating, who was taking care of others, who was doing the cooking, who was doing the shopping, who knew how to make a grocery list, who needed to control, who needed to determine where they were eating, what they were eating, determine the menu, take over the cooking if things weren't going right, who needed to make sure what ingredients were in what, who did all the ordering for people, who served themselves first, who ducked out of domestic chores and either they thought themselves above it, they didn't like to do work, or who didn't like to take on traditional female roles and rebelling against that at certain times in the book. And they also used food to show changes in dynamics of power, which was so interesting. Who had to do the cooking, who had to do the cleaning up, who served themselves first, who was served last. And there was this really, really particularly memorable scene between two characters when one was using this massive knife, this glinting huge knife, and I can still remember the writing, to chop up this watermelon right in front of this other character. And it was absolutely this horrifying, menacing description, and the other character absolutely was being intimidated. It was so well done and such an interesting theme throughout the book. And when you are on vacation, you know, food is such a major theme. You're always going out to eat, you're always thinking about food, and especially in a place like Greece, you're going to be wanting to try all the different foods and wines, and when you are usually imbibing things on these vacations, and that's altering your sense of memories and things, it was such an interesting thing done in this book, and it was done so well. And that was not the only thing that was amazing about the descriptions. I mean, every landscape, every visual, every ocean beach scene, everything was so vivid in this book. But the food as a theme thing, I just thought was so genius that I had to explain how well it was done. Another thing that it did better was that, you know, motives and backstories were just revealed naturally. They weren't withheld, they weren't teased. You didn't find everything out after putting in the effort of reading, say, half a book and getting driven crazy as a result. The dread in this book came on very naturally. It wasn't from an author going, huh, did you see that? Did you see that? Dun, dun, dun. It was just this very natural build, and you knew everything was a giant powder keg, and sooner or later things were going to explode. And boy, did they! And you know what else was great about this book is that along the way, characters were facing a lot of changes and facing a lot of things about themselves, and being away from things gave them all a different perspective. And I'm always going to be for a book that does everything it wants to do and is everything it wants to be, and in this case is absolutely a thriller, but also lets characters enjoy some self-discovery and maybe throw in a little sapphic love story along the way. If you're sick and tired of the hot tropical settings, might I suggest In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. And much like her most famous novel, this one also takes inspiration from something else, a traditional Halloween tale. It's a little poem. In a dark, dark wood, there was a dark, dark house, and in a dark, dark house, in a dark, dark room, and in the dark, dark cupboard, there was a skeleton. Can you guess how this story ends? It's a murder mystery. So what this did that made it so much more fun was the pacing. This book did what a lot of books do, which is that we see present time and then we see the Bachelorette Party. But what this book did very specifically is that it had the two moving simultaneously towards one another, so that the big reveal, the big climax of the book is when the two finally meet. And I loved watching the two timelines race to meet one another, because we do get Nora's memories slowly interspersed as they're coming back to her, and she knows she needs to hurry up and remember them, because the more she remembers, the more she realizes, oh, this is really bad, really bad. So that made it really fun, and you were dying to get back to her memories, but as her memories were happening, then you were like, oh my gosh, I need to get back to the party, so I need to know what led up to this. So it made for a really compelling story that just kept propelling itself forward as the timeline shot back and forth towards that final confrontation and big moment of peril that we usually get in these books. It's Ruth Ware. You know it's coming. I was actually really worried about a trope that I thought she was gonna bring in like the entire time for the most part. And it was such a wonderful red herring because I just kept waiting for it and waiting for it and waiting for it. And having that as this big question mark looming overhead throughout was such a nice touch. She really played the game the whole time. She got me. She did. And I love that. This is how I want an author to toy with me, okay? This is doing it right. And the November setting, as I mentioned, more and more and more it came into play. There was this threat of looming snow. There were like faulty locks on doors. There was a stream out there and you didn't want to get wet. And more and more and more it became this looming threat in the back of your mind. It started to come into play. And it really made for such an interesting element that you don't get in all of these tropical books. If you're stuck outside overnight in the middle of summer, well, honestly, that happened multiple times just because people passed out in a lounge chair. So that made for a much creepier vibe, and it was a nice change compared to most of the other books. Now, I will say Ruth Ware is an amazing writer, and I have loved some of her books so much, but this was written in 2015, and you can tell this is like an older Ruth Ware book. Her characters don't have necessarily like the same complexity that we've come to expect from some of her later characters. None of them were like super original. They lacked certain development and the amount of depth that I would prefer. Even the main character, I never really like truly felt convinced of her panic. She did have that cookie cutter feel, like you got that from all the characters to a certain extent. But then again, this was written in 2015. So am I saying that I've seen this all before just because everyone else did it after 2015? It's 2024 now. Maybe. As a result, I felt like the ultimate motives were like slightly implausible, but certainly not to the extent in She Started It. Oh my gosh. The thing was like offensive or problematic. But what this did lack that I think would have made all the difference in the world is this is the first one that I read that lacked other points of view. And I think just having one other point of view would have made all the difference in the world. This really would have benefited from showing us some other secrets, another voice, something else like that. I think that was what was lacking in this particular book. But that being said, it was a fun, easy read. I read it in one sitting. It's a great popcorn thriller. If you read this in the fall, it's so atmospheric. I loved it. I read it just as the weather was like hitting that cold snap and it was great. I think I read it in September and I just ate it up. And you know what? If you have some feelings you need to work through about like a bridezilla or a maid of honor who tormented you planning a bachelorette party and made you regret attending a bachelorette party at some point, In a Dark Wood might like make you feel a whole lot better. Now, most of the books that I found for this list are actually destination weddings because let's face it, most people are not going to go and spend a weekend on a deserted island or fly to a deserted house somewhere with their friends for a bachelorette party. Or maybe they do nowadays. That's impressive. You know, I thought bachelorette parties were like a night. But let's talk about some destination weddings, such as this one, You're Invited by Amanda J. Tissa. So this one actually takes us down more to one, maybe two-ish points of view. I'm going to say really one for the most part. The things that this book does better, first of all, the writing. The writing is just so much better than it was in She Started It. There was no condescension to be found. I was able to completely lose myself in this book and forget I was reading and get lost in the story and not feel like the author was sort of looming over me at any point, which was certainly appreciated. And the twist. This is one of my favorite twists in all of these books. I think I was very surprised. I didn't see it coming. Maybe other people did. I thought it was really well done, and it was really unique also. I've never read a book that took place in Sri Lanka, and I think the book kind of expected that. So it made sure to take the time to write the book in a way that it could really build up the setting for me. And it did this by writing in, my favorite thing, 2 timelines. So yes, we saw present day Sri Lanka, of course, which had changed quite a bit from past Sri Lanka. But in past Sri Lanka, seeing them in their childhood, we not only got to see the origins of the friendship between Amaya and Kavi, we got to see the differences in the country as well. It did this incredible job of using past and present scenes so you not only get a general sense sense of the setting, but of the culture and the social structure and the class disparities, which were, yikes. I mean, they still existed in the present, but in the past, holy cow. And by opting to use standard flashbacks instead of diary entries, like in She Started It, we get this steady, mature voice throughout that offers these really thoughtful observations. And the characterization winds up being done much more masterfully, in my opinion. And I also really preferred this much more complicated take on friendship. It wasn't just, okay, these are the friends and they're popular, so they're mean. It really took a look at female friendship and how loyalty works and how things change over time and what it means to be a true friend and how female friendships develop. And I think that these things, you know, like in She Started It, aren't always given the depth that they deserve, especially in thrillers when characterization isn't necessarily always at the forefront of the book's priorities, shall we say. So if you're looking for something that has a really unique setting, that's going to give you a taste of something you maybe haven't experienced before, and really is going to focus on the friendship between two characters, this would be a great choice. I really thought this was a strong, strong book, and the twist was great. Now, The Guilt Trip by Sandy Jones is a unique one, and this is actually rated lower on Goodreads than She Started It, which kind of shocked me, but I think that's because it kind of goes wild at the end, and in doing that, I think it was before its time. This was written in 2021, and I think if it was published like last year or now, people would really be eating it up a lot more than they would have back then. I think it was written just like right before everyone was ready for the crazy explosive endings that we are more accepting of now. You know how everyone was talking about the writing retreat last year and like half people hated it, half people loved it because they were saying the ending went wild and I haven't read it yet? I think this would have had that kind of like excitement surrounding it if it had come out last year. Now, at first, you need to give this book a chance because I liked the opening of this book way less than She Started It. Granted, the opening of She Started It was the best part of the book. But this author, you have to get used to her writing style because her idea of writing is just throwing you in. She's like, we're going to open and these characters, you're just going to pretend you know them and they're going to be talking and you're going to be in the middle of the action and you're just going to go. And you're going to find stuff out along the way as they do and you're going to learn about them along the way as they do. And that's how things are going to happen. We're just taking off running. And once it got going, things did start to get filled in very quickly. People's relationships got complicated very quickly, and things got interesting very quickly. The author began seamlessly just giving you these little tidbits, and she just dropped them so gently into sentences that you almost didn't notice them at first. And then you realized, oh, you're just gonna drop that in there. Okay. And the tension, it starts pretty much immediately. This book doesn't let you settle. It just doesn't. And as a result, because you are just set right off from the start, somehow, even though this book is written in third person, I was able to be thrown more into the character's shoes than I normally am in a first person POV book, which is so interesting. I'm not really sure how the author did it, especially when she was switching points of view throughout. Each character was so dynamic and so rich and so real because you just got their stream of consciousness thoughts. This author didn't hold back. You got what they were thinking, not just what they were doing. And it was so unique. Like all those guilty thoughts that you would never say out loud that you normally aren't privy to, you are in the guilt trip. And as the characters are giving you these stream of consciousness thoughts, all their insecurities are making you question your own interpretations of the characters and the situations. They're basically all unreliable at every single moment. You never knew who you could trust. You never knew what you could trust. You felt like you were standing in quicksand, but in the very best way possible. You never got solid ground, and I never wanted solid ground. I will say there were some pacing issues around the 2/3 mark. I think a little bit of an edit could have been done there. It did slow down. I didn't want to catch my breath, and I almost did there. But for the most part, and especially at the end, the author did an amazing job of just pulling rug after rug after rug after rug after rug out from underneath your feet. And I will say this book also did handle one of the topics that I thought was done so poorly in She Started It, and I thought it was handled in a much better, much gentler way. So points for that, Sandy Jones. Welcome to the wedding of the year in the guest list, which you Killed to Be On by Lucy Foley. Now, this one, if you want to read it, you probably already have, but in case you need a little bit of a nudge, this is an exclusive wedding on a remote Irish island. Yes, we are leaving the warmer weather and heading to a chillier spot. This is on a remote island off the coast of Ireland where, don't you worry, the cell phone reception is nice and spotty, and this is rich people problems to the extreme, don't you worry. Now, personally, I think the setting is amazing. It is so atmospheric, and instead of this tropical island thing we've had going on for the most part so far, we get the mist, we get the stormy seas, we get the pouring rain, we get everything you could want in that amazing dark stormy night kind of setting, which I love. I think the atmosphere in this is one of the best parts. One of the other best parts of this book is absolutely the writing. Lucy Foley is a terrific writer when it comes to thrillers. She doesn't overwrite things, but I think she is a more elevated thriller writer. She does have that slight lilt to it, and in this case I think she played into it to give us that real feel of the Irish coast, and it worked really, really well for me. Another thing that worked well for me, you know how I said I hated all of the characters in She Started It? Well, I hate all the characters in this too, but guess what? That's because they're insufferable jits, and they all know it. They don't like each other. I'm not sure they like themselves, and I don't think Lucy Foley liked any of them either, so guess what? The hate fest is supposed to be a hate fest. It's a hate read because you're supposed to hate them and you can revel in it. You don't have to feel bad when the terrible fates befall them because, well, I'm not going to say they deserve it, but you don't feel that terrible for all of them because guess what? They all do terrible things to one another in varying degrees. So you just kind of sit back and watch it unroll. And who does not love that classic Clue-esque scene where everybody's in a room together and all of a sudden, bam, the lights go out, oh, lights go back on, and suddenly it's a closed room, closed island murder scene. Lucy Foley goes for it. The rich people drama, everyone's a terrible person, everyone has horrible secrets, everyone's stabbing each other in the back, the loss of power, the sudden murder, I mean, the whole thing. I think she had a ton of fun writing this book, and that's why I think I had the best time reading this book. I loved this one. In fact, I'm pretty sure I read it on my birthday, and I just thought, like, this is a happy birthday present to me. When I picked up So Happy For You by Celia Lasky, it might say she'd kill for the perfect wedding, but I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I didn't realize this was in like a slightly alternative universe, like dystopian world where marriage is like everything and you want to do anything and everything to get married and secure it, and you have like ratings and rankings and the whole world knows them, and there's like countdowns going on depending on your age and your wealth status and how attractive you are to match you up with different people, and the countdown, like you start getting emails when you're like 30, hey, you're getting old, you're running out of time, you better find a partner in life soon. And it doesn't seem like that far off. At least in America, there definitely feels like there's more pressure to get married and have children coming, at least from the conservative end of the spectrum now than I remember feeling before. Maybe because, you know, birth rates have gone down a ton. I just didn't see that coming. So when I started reading the book and I was like, after the divorce rate soared to 76% and the marriage rate dwindled to 21%, happiness was not good for capitalism or the patriarchy. So the National Organization for Marriage was founded. You get all these benefits for getting married, you get all these benefits for having children, and you want to make sure you have a good ranking and make a good match. It's a crazy book, and to ensure that your marriage stays together and is a good one, people are taking, you know, things like, it's not throwing the bouquet anymore, it's pulling from like really old religious things and like sacrificing a chicken or something. This book was wild. So now that I have spewed all that about this book, let's talk about why it was 5 stars. First of all, putting it in this slightly alternate universe, this step in another reality, made all of the high stakes, made everything it was doing make so much sense. It was such a refreshing and unique take on the whole like destination wedding from hell trope. And what I found so fascinating about this book, you know, obviously it's a social commentary and this slightly dystopian take on weddings and marriage in general, but it was not just a government push to reinstate marriage as an institution, which would have been like, okay, we've kind of seen that done to a certain extent before. You could have gone like a religious route or however you wanted to go about it. We've seen that with like the Handmaid's Tale and things, right? It wasn't just to increase population, but to help give the economy a massive boost. What an interesting take. That's so much more American. It really is when you think about it. And right now the wedding industry is, in fact, I looked this up, a $70 billion industry. And yeah, I totally bought into that. Okay, I had the big white wedding. No one's shocked to hear this. Maybe I'll pop a picture of me in my big white wedding dress up, because why not? And despite the fact that Americans in the book were so much happier single and like spending time doing their own thing and developing their relationships in the way that they wanted and cultivating their friendships and enjoying themselves, apparently the patriarchy, shockingly, and capitalism doesn't really care about your happiness or well-being. And I love the take on money can't buy happiness. I love it. And even more interesting were like the pagan and witchcraft elements that were brought into the book as these wedding charms. And some were like openly offered on these like wedding menus you would get at wedding venues. They had like garlic and sage bouquets to ward off spirits. And then others were like whispered or, you know, like emailed in secret because they were like more dangerous, more frowned upon, more expensive. You get the drift. It was so interesting to see that and see that instead of a rise of traditional religion, we were having a rise of paganism and witchcraft with this rise in marriage, which is the exact opposite of what we usually see books do. But seeing superstitions come back when there's so much on the line with marriage in terms of like government rewards, it kind of made sense. And obviously is what brought about a lot of the craziness towards the climax of the book. Seeing things that women would have previously been persecuted for in centuries past now being like widely accepted because they were benefiting the economy and the government as opposed to like taking away from men's power and the government's power, like midwifery when men were suddenly becoming like the educated doctors and they were in competition. Oh my god. Women can have some power, just so long as they're using it to become wives and mothers and stay in the home. This book has so much to say. And like, she started it, which had nothing to say. So if you want out there feminist exploration of the wedding industry and this intimate portrait of female friendship, because it is. Their friendship is so complicated. And we do see a little bit of Robin's relationship with her girlfriend as well, and seeing like the contrast between romance between women and then friendship between women. I think the author did a nice job contrasting while ultimately coming down and saying what's most important is like trust and loyalty. Ooh. Because, you know, things happen when women grow up and grow apart. I don't think I've read anything quite like it. It has this slightly irreverent tone that was just delightfully refreshing in a genre that I think usually takes itself more seriously and with a topic that I think is usually taken more seriously. It's a weird fit for this video, but it is a fit. And I'd be so happy for you if you read it and enjoyed it. So that's it for me. She started it. I wish she hadn't, but if she hadn't, we wouldn't have this video, which I hope you enjoyed. Please give it a like and subscribe and let me know if you read this book, and I really hope that I didn't just insult one of your favorite thrillers, because I'd feel really bad if I did. I'm really sorry if I did, but I really genuinely hated this. Anyway, let me know if you have read any of these other suggestions or if you think you might read any. I hope you enjoyed this lovely taste of summer in the middle of winter. I have had enough of the gloom and gray, which is why I am filming this now. I personally am one of those people who just need sunshine at this point, and I'm ready for spring. Anyway, I will let you get back to your book, and I'll be getting back to mine. Not this one. And if you are invited to a destination wedding, if you haven't seen or heard from the bride or groom in more than several years, if there is no cell phone service, no internet connectivity, if no one else is on the island. No staff, no other houses. If it's on a giant cliff, or in general you're just getting bad vibes, please leave because I love you all. Bye. And yes, okay, I know it turned pink. There was, an attempt, but it ended up all mushing together when it dried, and I attempted to dry it with a blow dryer, and now my bathroom looks like a scene from one of these books, but this just turned pink.